And you are now live, which is me. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Everybody Loves Raymond 360. We are visiting today with Tom McGowan. Hello, Leo. Hello, everybody. Welcome, fans of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is Tom Caltabiano. Looking forward to catching up part 2 with Tom McGowan. And I'll try and summarize. Hello, Gil. How are you guys doing over there in the UK? Is it a little bit cold? Let me adjust my camera. Hello, Karen in Plymouth, England. Good seeing everybody. Hello, Gary. Hello, Paula. We've created quite the little family here. Let's see if I can invite. Here we go. Welcome. What a great week last week. Oh, wow. So perfect, Tom. Can you hear me, Tom?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can. Let me just adjust my mic a little.
Hello, hello.
There we go. There we go, Tom. Well, let me move back a little. There we go. You're now, Tom, did you make it to Oklahoma?
I did. Made it.
And how was that?
It was great. It was great. I spent 2 weeks with my students and some time in Dallas with my mother-in-law and some friends. It was great.
Oh, wow. 2 weeks. So this is the first time. So I want to go back and paint the picture again for everybody.
All right.
We're talking to Tom McGowan. Tom played Bernie on Everybody Loves Raymond. Bernie Gruenfelder, right? I don't even know if you remember
yes.
that. Yes.
Oh.
Which I do want to ask you if you ever met the real Bernie. But
I don't think so.
Okay. So I'll get into that a little bit. And so Tom was friends with Phil Rosenthal going all the way back to their acting days at Hofstra University. On our last visit, we almost got to Everybody Loves Raymond. And the response, yes, Tom, you could pull your camera down, your phone a little bit down. Yes. It's funny because unless you can't, Tom, if it's a pain, don't worry about it.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah. And so then Tom and Phil were both, Tom and Phil were both actors and with a modicum of success. And Tom went to Yale, then ended up on Broadway, which was very impressive. And his friend Phil Rosenthal created a show called Everybody Loves Raymond. He wanted Tom to be in the pilot, but Tom was busy on a Fox show that was about to be canceled, and they wouldn't let him out of his contract. And which is not uncommon in Hollywood. But then we learned later that Tom was on Frasier, and they were very cooperative. So Tom was on 2 of the top shows.
That's right.
And
Is the camera okay?
It looks better, Tom. Yes, okay. Absolutely. So now, Tom, we went back. But you also teach at Oklahoma
City University. Yeah, I started during COVID over Zoom when I lived in New York, and it went so well that when I moved back to California, they asked me to continue. It's been really fun, and except that I have to teach at 7 a.m. at California time. Other than that, it's been great.
and they're on Zoom, Tom, and you're
yeah.
And you're seeing individuals on Zoom at home, or they're in a big class?
They're in a class. It's only 12. It's a nice small class, but because it's on camera, they're filming themselves anyway. So they upload stuff and we watch it back. But being on campus for a couple of weeks was really, really great because we got some great work done. And of course it was a little quicker, and I had some good barbecue. So, it's all good.
And let me ask you something, Tom, because what we learned from your previous visit is the life of an actor in Hollywood is nonstop struggle, right? You have tremendous amount of rejection. At any success level in Hollywood, you're going to be just, what do I want to say? It's a brutal amount of rejection all the time. So your last award-winning performance might be great. But now you're going to walk into a room of people with their arms folded and go, yeah, I don't think so. And so how do you prepare the students for that life?
Well, I'm honest with them. I will tell you that. I've told them about the months sitting on my couch waiting for things to happen, and then the busy months where it seems like you didn't have a second to breathe. So I'm very, very honest with them, but it's a passion I had. It's a passion they have, and you got to stick with it. I think it is a good profession for the young. There are more parts for the young and all that. So I think, and all the streaming going on, I think film and television is a hopping market. It's sort of a golden age of television. I think there's some amazing for the last few years, just great shows. So, yeah, but we talk about auditions. They have a whole separate audition class. And there's a business section, where they talk about how to get apartments and how to get survival jobs and all that kind of stuff. So I'm honest, but try to also build their confidence, because that's important.
Well, and I think, Tom, just because we're talking about it, I don't think that existed when you went to college to such a degree.
The on-camera stuff?
The on-camera, no, but the awareness of, hey, you're going to a life of this. So here's how you're going to survive.
It's not only an undergraduate, but even I went to Yale School of Drama, and there was no talk about it. It was just sort of like, good luck out there. There was no like preparation for, you relied on your friends that had graduated before you, but there wasn't like a whole bunch of, really detailed information about how to actually get day to day.
Yeah, and I think, as mundane as that might sound, that really separates your ability to survive in many ways, because it really is a game of attrition out here. And I spoke at a friend of mine taught at a college in Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan, called Grand Valley State University, and he was teaching a sitcom writing class. And a lot of those kids moved out, and I worked with them when they came out, and probably 4 of them already didn't so much enjoy the unknown nature, and moved back already and are living their life back in Michigan, which is.
Yeah, my wife, Kathy, when she graduated from SMU in Dallas, from the acting program, and her and 7 friends moved to New York, and we met the next month and started dating. And by the time, then we went on tour, we did King Lear in Europe together. That's how we met. And when we came back, all her other friends had already moved back home to Dallas. All of them, because it was tough.
Yeah, what was that period of time, Tom?
The years, like
no. How long were you in Europe before her friends?
5 months.
5 months. Yeah.
Yeah. So within like 8 or 9 months, most of her friends had moved back home.
Yeah.
It's tough. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for fans, when you're watching the show, it's great. You're watching, even for me when I was a kid, like I wish I could be on the set of MASH and the same thing when I see a comedian going on. Now they don't do it as much, but on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, I'd be like, wow. But now I know that person has slaved away for years and years and years in terrible clubs, and just been, working and to see that 6 minute is the highlight. Anyway, I don't
like I think I said last week, when I was on Raymond and Frasier, and I was like driving back and forth and doing both episodes, I knew to enjoy it and to be like, look how lucky you are. There was no time for being tired, no time for being, well, why couldn't I do one next week? And I was like, no, this is as good as it gets. I do see some great questions here, and I've never done stand-up. That always scared me. I probably should have tried, but that was scary. And then, I really wish I could see everybody from Everybody Loves Raymond and Frasier again too. I'm sorry, the questions are going by very quickly.
Yeah. And do you, just for people watching, because I do want to bring it up to you, I saw you at Thanksgiving, yes. Right? And then I also saw you the next day, because Phil was showing the Get Back documentary part of it. So we'll get back to that. Karen asked, do you do a lot of teaching, Tom, or is this something new?
I would, when I toured with Broadway musicals, I would always give talks, like sort of masterclass talks, but this was my first full time. I've always thought about it, but this is, COVID was sort of a perfect excuse since everything else was shut down. So I'm really, really enjoying it. Yeah. It is new though, just 2 years.
And first of all, that's great. And I'm sure you find it rewarding. And
more than
like,
I could have thought, actually. I mean,
yeah,
it really, I mean, I thought I'd enjoy it, but you don't realize how much you've learned after decades in the business and how eager 20-year-olds are to know what it's really like.
yeah. And I know that just, you're in this sweet spot of a very, very successful actor who's made a living, and a lot of people that are teaching acting. And this I always have arguments with people where you don't have to be the most successful person to be the teacher. So the guy who's a great tennis coach didn't necessarily win Wimbledon, but who cares, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that you are so successful, it adds a little more weight when and I made the joke last time, we noticed you did one, peanut butter commercial in 1986, and that was your whole career. So there's a little bit more weight of pragmatic, and when you're saying it, it's like, okay, I'm going to trust him versus rolling your eyes a little, especially as a 20-year-old who's like, whatever, So when you go, it's funny because when Clint Eastwood and they go, oh, okay, that's
yeah,
that has a little weight. So Tom, going hello. Sorry, I'm saying hello to. There's so many people. Hello, Josh, if you're watching, who just came on. Hi, Tom from Grand Rapids, Michigan. You were my favorite friend of Ray's. Do they ever wish they gave you a standalone episode on ELR?
Well, I would film my own when I was home. I'd make up stories for Bernie. I was grateful every time they called me. If you noticed, well, of course, there's all fans here. They would bring me in even for sort of flashback episodes on weeks where I wasn't, just to be sort of in the background, just to sort of keep the feel of the show. And I always loved that. I was always like, oh, come over this afternoon, be on television tonight, have the great food Phil's going to prepare, and then go home. I've been to Grand Rapids with Wicked. I've been there twice, or I think maybe just once there, but I like that town a lot.
Oh yeah, it's a great town for those that don't know. It's a very so just to go deeper into that question from Tanthaman 228. If there's really no such thing as a standalone episode on ELR for any character, including the main cast.
Yeah.
So it's a great question, which is like, yes. And the best way to have that happen is to have the creator and showrunner of the show be your best friend. So if you're ever poised to have that happen, then, so the stories were serviced by the character. So you usually came up with, or always, what is a good story, period. Okay. Oh, you know what? We need Bernie and Linda in this one. Okay, so now, Tom McGowan's availability, go check that. So never in the writer's room are you like, and I'm saying this knowing that Phil's best friend is Tom. Let's see, do we have a big part for Tom McGowan? Why don't we give Brad Garrett some less lines? And it just is not a possibility on a network show.
Yeah.
It's so we use them as much. I mean, Phil used them as much. And as I found out from the last visit, the only reason Tom wasn't in the pilot is because he had a previous engagement with a network that wouldn't let him out of his contract. So, which is,
when you're talking about using things from your own life. I had one thing in Raymond that was based on an incident. It was sort of just the opening, the cold open, where both parents are out and they think both of them are home, and they come home and the daughter has made pancakes for the kids. And that happened to me and Kathy. We both thought we left my son alone when he was, I don't know, 8 or 9, I don't even know, not realizing that he was alone. And we came back and he had made pancakes. So that little bit was based on my life. But none of the wife fighting was ever, because I have a perfect marriage. So we had to rely on the other writers' marriages to have fights.
That is so, I'm assuming that potentially your wife might see this, Tom, which is why you were able to editorialize that.
Oh yeah, she can't get enough of me on television, on Instagram. She can't get enough.
Well, as Ray said,
Karen Cooney, I see that you're saying a lot of great stuff. Thank you, Karen.
Ray said, he doesn't even have a good rating inside his house because when Everest Raymond was on Friday, his kids were watching Sabrina the Teenage Witch. So, Tom, I love the episode where you and Ray were arguing at Rose Caputo's funeral.
Yeah.
Okay, that's.
I remember that one because I had the great line, "I like pie." I think that was that episode. And years later, right before the end of Frasier, I got a tap on my shoulder at Frasier, and someone said, "I like pie," and I turn around and it was Al Roker. And Al Roker was like, I'm here covering the end of Frasier, but I also love Raymond. And as you know, him and Phil became friends. And
yeah.
He's a great guy.
That's great. And I will say, Tom, other than it being someone famous tapping you on the shoulder, there are quotes when I post a picture and I go, what are these people talking about? And then I realize, oh, that's a quote from the show.
Oh, yeah.
And I shouldn't know that. So I should know that. All right, Tom, let me just scroll back before we start moving forward. Oh, Karen, this is a good question. How far in advance do you find out when you were in an episode of ELR?
I'd say usually 2 or 3 weeks. Or actually at the beginning of the season, because the writers were so prepared. If I was in the first 6 or 7, I would know even earlier than that, right? Because you guys had set a bunch of scripts.
Yeah.
So sometimes I would know a couple months, but usually 2, 3, 4 weeks where they give me sort of a heads up, and then 2 weeks ahead say, that scene is in, definitely, can we work it out?
Right. And that's a rare thing. I know on Seinfeld, Friends, sometimes they would finish the draft the night before for the show, and then they would have to cast the person the next day. And so did you ever experience that type of short, can you come and read and you're filming within days?
I did, actually. I did an episode of Veep where they added a character after they had finished filming the whole episode. They realized they needed a congressman for 2 scenes, and very nicely they just offered it to me, and I took the train down from New York on a Friday, worked all day Saturday because it was an overtime day, and so it does, especially near the end of the season. This was actually the last episode of that season. I think it was season 4 or 5, I'm not sure, but yeah, it does happen where near the end of the season people are just burnt out and they're writing as they go.
So what Tom? So Veep was a show with Julie Louis-Dreyfus, for those of you that haven't seen it, and won a ton of Emmys. And it filmed in DC?
It did for the first few seasons, and then when their original executive producer moved back to London, Julia Louis-Dreyfus said, "Let's film in LA now for the rest of the I don't know how many more seasons, but they did 3 or 4 other more seasons." But yes, a terrific show. If it comes to your country, if you're around the world, it's an amazing show.
And did you have any scenes with Julia Louis-Dreyfus?
I didn't. She had been wrapped, but I worked with a few of the people that were just great. I worked with 4 or 5 of the main cast members. Just really, really fun.
That's awesome. And Tom, in the scheme of things where most shows, and what you're referencing is Everest Raymond, because of Phil being very organized, would force the writers, almost like slave labor, to write over our break. So when we showed up on June 1st, we had 10 scripts or 9 scripts finished. So Tom would find out if he's in a script June 1st and it's going to film July 25th. And other shows, so therefore we were ahead the entire season. So most shows slowly keep falling behind because it's very, very hard. So what Tom's referring to is by the end of the season, the end of doing 22 or 24 or 26 episodes, some of these people are doing all night long sessions of writing, etc. And one of the questions that was in one of the posts that I think Leo asked was, I was saying for the curtain call standard deviation, you're wearing the same clothes that you are in the last scene because you want to get the audience, you want to release the audience, right? They've been sitting there for 3 hours. And Leo, I think it was Leo, said, 3 hours, why so long? And now, that's funny when you have been on other shows.
Yes. Why so short is
why so short? Yes, it struck me as a question. So what I'm referring to is when you film a show, you always do 2 scenes. And so you always do 2 takes, no matter if it's perfect. If every single scene is perfect, you're still doing it twice for safety reasons in case something happens to the film. So instantly double the time, So now you're at least 45 minutes just to do it straight, double normally. But then you have to move cameras, wardrobe changes, mistakes, etc. So 3 hours is exceptionally short.
Plus, there's pickups, in different camera angles. Yeah, 3 hours is fantastic. If you can get a show between 2.5 and 3.5 hours, you've got a well-oiled machine. Raymond was especially lucky because Mark Sweet was the warm-up guy, one of the best in the business, and you would go and take a half hour of questions, and they always loved that. I wonder if that's the inspiration for you doing this. But people would love to ask sort of behind the scenes questions. And Mark's job was not only to keep people up and sort of excited, but he would do contests and magic tricks, and there's like 3 or 4 great ones, and Mark was one of them.
Yeah, and I think Mark is the top of the heap. I think what also that you're referring to, and then we got to really get to the beginning of the show, beginning of the pilot, the beginning of the series. The live audience takes a really big. It gives all the actors, and you can speak to this because you've done live theater, you've done movies, and you've done TV. The actors feed off of the energy of the live studio audience. And so you want that audience engaged. And to ask somebody to sit for 3 hours is asking a lot. On Friends, they would sit for 6 hours. So sitting down, watching for 6 hours. I don't know how long Frasier took, but I'm assuming 4 hours or 3,
They would, on good nights, they would do 2.5, 3, and then usually between 3 and 4. Yeah.
Right. So that's normal. So when I would go into the audience and answer questions, which I totally enjoyed, and going back to just ad-libbing from doing stand-up, the normal thing is you're overwhelmed as an audience member because you're watching at home, you just see, oh, they're doing the show in front of me. But when you're you're looking around like, who's that guy? What is that? What is going on there? Like, it's so much stuff going on. So in many ways, when you answer the questions, you're putting the audience at ease. Yeah. You're like, okay, this guy's doing this, and this guy, and everyone has a reason. There's no extraneous people hanging around just making up work. Everything is essential, but it's kind of overwhelming. All right.
What was great to be on Raymond a little bit throughout was when you see the audience start catching on, when the audience starts becoming fans. At first, they're just coming because they got free tickets somewhere. Maybe they've heard of Doris Roberts, and maybe they saw Ray on, or Peter Boyle or whatever. But they're just like, please, please, please come to the show. And then they're lucky that this show was good. But once the audience started watching and catching on, it was just amazing, the energy in that room that people, and I joined Frasier like 5 years in. So just the people, when you're on a show that people just love, there's like nothing like it.
Yeah. So I'm scrolling back. Yeah, absolutely. I never heard of Veep. Is it on Netflix? Interesting. I don't know. So Tom, only because we are so in Hollywood, that's why I know when I get the questions from Croatia, I'm like, oh yeah, they don't know the nature of NBC when Raymond started. So I don't know if Veep is on Netflix. It's a great show though. It's a very funny show. Won a ton of Emmys, and very often for actors that are characters on a hit show, it's called a golden cage because you're there, and then potentially you'll never be seen as anything else. So Julie Louis-Dreyfus was one of the great proof otherwise.
She was, yeah.
All right, so Tom,
yeah,
I want to now let's go back because you were going to mention, and somebody just mentioned about how proud you were of your friend Phil. So the pilot gets shot. You're not in it. When do you watch the pilot for the first time?
I was at the taping. I can't imagine I wasn't. I'm almost sure I was at the taping. I don't know if I saw. I think I might have seen it with America when it actually aired. I don't know if I saw it beforehand. I don't remember. It was so many years ago, Tom. But yes, I think I just watched it. I mean, I had read it. I'd read like the first draft, and I think I read another draft, like a shooting, like right before you started. And then I came to the taping, and you just have your fingers crossed. It's all a miracle. It's all a crapshoot. You never know. But how quickly they came up to speed, that show, like how quickly it was good, was really something to see. And of course, they were showing it like in a terrible time slot and all that. But luckily, luckily, I don't know how it happened, but they kept it around long enough for America to catch up.
Yeah, well, and just for people watching, it aired initially at 8:30 on Friday nights on a network called CBS, which is in third place out of 3 networks, and they hadn't had a hit in that time slot since the 60s, and this is 1996. So it didn't bode well. There was a lot of good critics' reviews, and then the president of CBS gave it a try, moved it to Monday night for 4 episodes, and if it didn't do well, they were going to cancel the show. But it did do well. So now, Tom, the part of Leo is then written for you, basically.
Bernie.
Well, he
Leo in the original. Yeah.
Leo in the pilot.
Yeah.
Is probably would have gone, well, not probably, 100%. That would have been Tom McGowan doing the little stint in there. That was in the pilot. So you didn't get that. Now, Phil says, listen, you're in the first 3. You're in I Love You, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm trying to think of the next ones. Standard Deviation you're in. And I know the fans will know.
Yeah, it's like 3 out of 6, I think. 3 out of the first 6.
And Look, Don't...
Nemo's a lot, and in the house, yeah.
Yeah, Look, Don't Touch. And the first time now, you hear, the show's gotten picked up, you watch it on the air. At that point, you'd already filmed on Raymond when it aired. So it aired, I think, September 13th, 1996. But we already filmed I Love You, I Love You episode. So for you just walking on the set, on the stage at Hollywood Center Studios, and that's where we let off, what was that feeling to see Phil, because this is the first time your friend is running a show?
Yeah, and I've been on an episode of Coach when Phil was on the staff. Of course, Down the Shore, or which Phil had a lot of input on. But this was now his show, and we talked about it last time that he was a very funny actor and just wasn't getting anywhere, and had made this really big life decision to try writing and move out to LA with just I'm just going to try it, and then now. Probably again, he worked his tail off, but it's seemingly overnight he starts getting work. So he knows he's good at it, and he learns, and he keeps meeting the best people to learn, and picking their brains. But when I walked onto the set the first time, even though of course everyone was nervous because who knew if the show was going to make it or anything, but Phil was sort of the calm center of the storm in a way. Everything filtered through Phil, which is very, very hard to do. If the writer said something after a take, they would go to Phil. It was such a, if you're on a show and this writer is coming up to you and saying, oh, you should take a big pause there, and the other writer's coming up and said, you should cut that pause, you get very confused. So everything would be filtered through Phil. And the cast, we would have notes after run-throughs, after scenes, and especially on show night. They hung on his every word because they knew he was trying to make the show better. Phil has the line, the funniest idea wins. It doesn't matter who comes up with it, the funniest idea wins. So the writers felt that they were respected in that way. And the cast knew that Phil was just looking for what was best. But what I was most proud of, being his friend, was his confidence at this new job. He had seen a bunch of people do it, but it was now his job and it was his show. And he had a confidence level that, having seen him, question his acting ability and do all this kind of stuff, he knew exactly what he wanted for this show. He knew what the tone was going to be. It's why he stayed with it for the whole time. He loved the writers. He loved the cast. One of the reasons you had 9 shows to start a season is because you had the same writers, because it was the best room in town. He hired great and then kept them happy. So it was just great. But one of the things that separated Phil from any other show writer is he would actually give notes to the actors if a joke didn't work, where almost every other room would be, the actor didn't get the joke, we'll just cut it and rewrite something else. And sometimes it just took a former actor, especially a funny one, to say, oh, that was supposed to be sarcastic, or, oh, that's in reference to what they said last scene. And all of a sudden the joke works. It's a lot less work for the writers, but it would make sense to the actors, especially that show where, there was a lot of theater trained actors and things like that. So they were like, oh, sometimes just tell me what the joke means if I don't get it. And it just saves so much time. And without giving line readings and without, it was just, oh, what we wrote on paper wasn't as clear to the actor. So let's just give them a note and see how that works. It doesn't happen as much as you would think. A lot of times it's just like, oh, they didn't get it, we'll write something else. It's like, no, 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 give them a note. Give them a note. Just tell them how to do it. So I just, the way he took care of just sort of everybody, and he sort of, I'm sure it was exhausting, but he sort of reveled in, this is going to be a nice place to work. People are going to want to come. He has the whole thing about the food and how people bond over the food. And he just insisted that this was going to be a great place to work for everybody. And it always starts from the top. Him and Ray treated people great, and it goes down and down and down.
Yeah, and I think, so I'm agreeing with everything, because obviously I watched it. And I think Phil very much also locked in to this show. I mean, it's his show, but I mean, the dynamic of it's him and Ray working together, and that dynamic of the family and the family dynamic. And then you get Phil's theater background. And so what you're referring to, just for people, at the end of a run through where you rehearse the entire show, very often something doesn't get a laugh, and then the actors just go back to the writer's room, and now the actors that night get, oh, completely new joke. Okay. So it's twofold in that when you're acting, you have 5 days, let's say, to learn this script. Every single day, it becomes more and more a part of the actor, and they become, and the delivery, the performance, everything depends. So if you're asking the actor to learn a new line every single day, all of a sudden they're like, you know what? I have it now. That's great. That's great that you have it, because we filmed it 6 days ago, because they're not giving the chance. So there was very a few times when Phil, with all the actors gathered, would go, I think that's a writing problem. Let us look at that. But for the most part, what Phil would jump in, and rather than just disappearing after the run through, Phil would sit there and go through very, very elaborate notes. And it would just be, I think Bernie wants to be more this here. And so and for an actor, I think it's tough initially. And Tom, you can speak to this. Because we know we just want the funniest thing. Everyone just wants the funniest thing. And so we're not sitting there going, I'm using you because I don't want to hurt anyone else's feelings, but we're not sitting there going, boy, Tom McGowan is not a good actor, is he? It's like, oh, I think he missed the time. I don't ever remember a time when you missed a joke, Tom. So I'm just using you as the whipping boy of this example. But I think Tom he's got to pause there, and when we're watching it, and it's tough not to be defensive and be like, I'm good. I can do comedy. I really am. Give me another chance. So
yeah, the thing is, if you get a new joke every day, you can't help but think, oh, I'm not funny. I'm not delivering these jokes. If you get a note, like an actor gets a note in the theater, you're like, oh, that's great. That helps me. And then so that would always be, always a nice shortcut. But yes, you don't want to, you're always a little, especially when you first started on the show, you're always a little paranoid that like they're going to catch on, that you have no idea what you're doing. But yeah, no, it really was great. And the other thing I remember, could I talk about those early days a little bit?
Go.
One of the things I remember about those early days, first of all, for those of you that might not know, Doris and Peter Boyer were already legends. I mean, they were legends in the business. And Patty had great experience. But with Ray and Brad, they develop sitcoms for stand-ups all the time. It's a huge, huge part of the business. But you never know what you're going to get acting-wise. And it became so clear so early that both of them were way up to the challenges. You've seen the work they've done since. I mean, they're terrific actors, as opposed to just being funny stand-ups. It's a separate thing. And when you sort of saw that relief, even in the pilot episode, that Ray was able to turn his incredible stand-up and put emotion behind it and put, reality behind it and all that. And so Phil knew he had something. And if they would just give him the break, just give him the chance. And then, of course, Doris and Peter bring in like decades of just classic work. Peter was always incredibly kind to me. We always talked about the theater. I think he liked that I was a theater guy. His wife Lorraine is a producer, and Doris was great to me. Brad, I mean, they all were. Ray and Patty too, of course. Just always just great. And you saw the kind of talent that they attracted with Georgia and Fred Willard and Robert Culp and Katherine Hellman, and Chris Elliott, so they attracted all the, no one wants to be on that show if they don't want to, if they watch a couple episodes, like, I don't want to be on that show. But Raymond, people are like, oh my goodness, thank goodness. But it became apparent very early that the mesh was ready to be discovered. And it's such a miracle when the writing and the acting and the story and the plot just sort of come together at the same time. And this was one of those instances, and I'm so glad that it didn't not get a chance.
Get canceled, yeah. And I think off of that, Tom, we were talking about the Beatles documentary. And when you hear them singing together, when you hear the Beatles singing together, I know I'm saying the most obvious thing, but they're whatever that magic is there. As soon as they start playing live on that rooftop, you're like, oh yeah, you've seen all these struggles. And as soon as you hear that first chord and they're live, you're like, oh, it's magic. And so with a cast that clicks, like you look at Friends or Seinfeld, right? Or Frasier, you see this, whatever it is, that synergy works. And it's so much more than the individuals,
Well, you're in the 6th season and you cut to Peter Boyle and the look in his face is enough to bring the house down. That's 6 years of work, so it's like you see the Beatles in the Get Back, in their 7th year of whatever, but those kind of laughs have been built up for years and years and years. So it was wild to me. Peter just held a special place in my heart because he had done so many serious movies, and of course had done Young Frankenstein, and just he was sort of an icon to me. And the fact that he was kind to me, and by the way, John Lennon's best man at his wedding. No, John Lennon was his best man, right?
Yes.
And but just it was just great. And Doris, like the old pro that she was, like just such ease with her ability to get laughs and things. And she took those notes great from Phil too, because she had a huge comic sensibility. So she would, she was like, person's looking out for me.
Yeah. And just along those lines, I do know, I saw an interview with Doris where she was talking, it was very late after Raymond ended. And I think she won 4 Emmys. Someone can look that up. 4 Emmys with Raymond. She definitely won 3. Because when we went to her bar, it was filled with Emmys. It was crazy amount of Emmys, yeah. And so the bar in her house. But there's an interview, and I remember watching the interview, and I mentioned it to Phil, and I go, Phil, the one thing that she comments on, someone can pick that up in the press and make it sound like Phil was a tyrant on stage. And what she's referring to was, you work so hard to get to this point, and Seinfeld described it as, it's like walking across a room holding an egg and a spoon. At any point, it's failure. Writing, shooting, performance, editing. At any point, the egg splats and you've lost that comedy. And so you only have one chance to do a take in front of the audience live for the first time. And so Phil on stage, and I was going to ask you, Phil, from our perspective, appropriately was saying, hold, and he would stop because he saw this joke is not going to work because the actor, it doesn't matter which actor it is, Phil's just like, we want the best laugh, so let's hold. He didn't care who the actor was who might have screwed up a line, like hold before they say the punchline and it's not set up correctly, right?
Well, sometimes it would just be like a stumble on the setup line. I'll tell you, not only was that unbelievable and really something you cannot see that often. I will tell you, the other person who was great at that was Kelsey Grammer. Kelsey, if he stumbled the previous line, he would stop if he knew the punchline was coming. And I don't think in a million years I would ever, because I have this need to keep going because, I've been on stage and all that. But Phil was great at that. And sure enough, he was always right, because the second time the laugh is never as good as the first time you hear it. And if there's a stumble the line before and the audience is not quite getting it, that kind of stuff would always shock me that he was thinking that quickly, also watching 4 cameras and also making sure a million other things were going right. It was always, hold, I remember.
Well, when it's your script, I mean, it should be for any script, but I know when Ray and I wrote Jealous Robert together. We wrote a bunch together, but we wrote Jealous Robert together. And I remember there was a line where Peter,
he was about to screw it up, and Phil, was like, "Oh," they were like, "Oh, thank goodness for Phil," yelling that out. But as an actor, Tom, it's that you're going to get the better performance, and hopefully, you shot it. Everybody wins in that thing. But for an actor, and I think Peter had a tough time initially getting notes and that type of thing, because Peter's used to doing a movie where there's nothing lost if you screw up your line. There's nothing lost at all. You just let's do it again. There's no live audience, and so and there's a point in the show where you want everything to go well. So if it comes off the rails at some point, and I'm sure, Tom, you've been on pilots. You have much more experience on a diverse number of shows than I do. I'm sure that you've been on pilots where you go, this is just not working.
Yeah. There have been. Yeah. And it's just, there's sort of a scattered feeling, it's like you don't know who to turn to. That's what I was mentioning before about, first of all, that Ray and Phil developed this relationship. But because they developed that relationship, there was one voice that controlled, there was one voice on Raymond, and it was a successful voice. So everyone would come to rely on it. Yeah. And if you're in a show that's not so great and you're getting a lot of notes and you're like, I know what's funny and this guy doesn't, but that was not the feeling on Raymond. The feeling on Raymond was Ray and Phil know what's funny and they know what's best for the show. The care that they put into the show, even after its massive success, is what kept it going,
Well, and I think that's what you notice when I did work on other shows. I'm like, they don't care. Like, it's just as much effort to make a really bad show for the most part as a good show. But when I went on the set of King of Queens, and Ray was a guest, and I was like, oh, they're not. We would watch every scene and sit there, and if it didn't get a laugh, we would run in and give another joke. And you want to do that as little as possible. Your goal is to not have to do that. But the audience is the ultimate arbiter of what's funny. And so if you go, 200 people just told us we're not as funny as we think we are, let's come up with another joke. And that happened on King of Queens, where I watched this and I had an idea and I ran in and I gave Kevin, and the cameras had already moved away. So it was like, I said, Kevin, maybe you could say this at the end. And he said, call the cameras back. And they did it, and it wound up in the show. But that attention to detail that Phil and Ray did to the end, it is exhausting. It is. You have to care, and you have to every little nuance. And that's the difference between, the professional athlete and the really good amateur. They have that nth degree of perfection. All right. Tom, so let's read a few questions here. I caught you in Last of the Mohicans. Did you meet Daniel Day-Lewis?
I did not. I did not. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. I ended up with no lines in that, but it was technically my first movie. The first movie I had lines in was Sleepless in Seattle. But Last Mohicans, I was there for 3 weeks and basically sat in the hotel room and then sat in that chair, and then I was flown home. So I don't know what really happened to that movie. I enjoyed watching it, but I didn't get to meet Daniel Day-Lewis, which would have been fun.
By the way, Sleepless in Seattle, was Peter in that? Peter Boyle in that? Or was that You've Got Mail?
That's You Got Mail, I think. Yeah,
okay.
He was in it, yeah. But David Hyde Pierce was in that. Of course, we weren't in the same scene, but he was in Sleepless in Seattle.
Yes.
We worked together.
Okay, I'm scrolling through some of these questions because, Tom, as I feared, we've barely gotten to the
episodes.
Well, we'll have you back again, Tom. You're welcome. You're taking a drink. Hold on. Yes, it's my customary drink because I get winded. There we go. Yes.
Yeah.
My friend Phil. By the way, Tom, just because I know we're on there was Raymond, but can you talk about a special meal that you remember with Phil early on when you guys were both broke?
Well, when I first came to LA, one of our first meals was at Musso and Frank's. So I've always remembered that which is an old 100-year-old restaurant where you'll sit at one booth and they'll say, oh, this was Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio's booth. And the night we went, I remember, I think Diane Keaton was at one table and Mayor Tom Bradley was at another table. And I think I'd been in LA for a week and I was like, oh, the celebrities, can you believe the celebrities? But we, in those days, Phil was, Cafe Versailles and Zankou chicken and Dupar's pancakes. It was like the best of the cheap food in town. But we've eaten much fancier than that in the meantime.
Yes. But and just so you know, if anybody visits Hollywood, go to Musso and Frank's. It looks like it has not changed since I don't know what year, 1912 or something like that.
The original waiters are still there too.
Yeah.
With 100 years of attitude.
Yes, they're old.
It's a magnificent place. They actually have a little bar area that you could. If you're in LA, it's just one of those. It's just a very special place. I think.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's an iconic place in Hollywood, much like the Smokehouse. If you go to Warner Brothers on the tour to Smokehouse, and Tom. Okay, so now let me go back to. Let me see. Yeah. Oh wow. So many questions. Tom, going back to, was there a moment, because the show was still low rated, was there a moment when you felt like the show was going to make it from the outside? I remember the moment for us, being on the show. It was when they put us on Monday night and we were waiting for the ratings. And if we hammocked, meaning if we went down from our lead-in, we knew we were probably going to get canceled. But we got the ratings, the overnights, and we went up from our lead-in. This was the end of the first season. And so there was a sense of like, oh, this show is coming back. And do you
I don't remember it, but I do remember the feeling of they might get more for next season, but not it's a hit. You know what I mean? Like they're going to give them another season, which is fantastic. Every step is fantastic. But I don't remember at that time thinking, oh, it's a hit show. But did it take off in the second year ratings wise?
Yeah, in the second year it took off. We were still completely obscure, never got nominated for an Emmy at the beginning. We thought, well, the show will never get nominated for an Emmy, but who cares, because you're doing, and there was a feeling of like, I feel like we're doing, you're watching them yourselves, you're going, I feel like this is as funny as anything else on TV. I wonder why we're not getting nominated. And there's just a momentum. Seinfeld was season 3 before it caught on. Season 3, which is crazy to think about, because it went off the air as the #1 sitcom, which is very, very rare to do. I think I Love Lucy might be the only other one to do it. So there is a momentum, but there wasn't, there was a ratings where, and also we should add that CBS was in very, very bad shape. So there were no other hit shows on CBS. So Friends, NBC, which had Friends, Frasier, and Seinfeld, was this juggernaut of, they seemed that they would never be dethroned. And Everett Raymond actually ended up helped turn CBS around. And that was never admitted by the CEO until the very last episode, when nobody could ask for more money. That's what he said.
You think about, I think if you knew of Raymond at that point, Everybody Loves Raymond, you thought of it as like, you thought of it as a good, solid show. But if you watched it, it was hysterically funny. It is a well-made, old-fashioned family sitcom. But when they're done at that kind of level, it's funnier than anything else, because it's more relatable than anything else. And so it was just, the eyeballs needed to be on it. People just had to watch it, and they would want to come back.
Yeah, and I think Phil said it best during the acceptance speech for the second Emmy the show won, which was like, here's to my hip and edgy, it was for Hollywood standards, it was a dull show just about a family. So from the outside, you're like, there's nothing sexy about this show. But then when you watch it, you see, and I think even one year, Friends won the Emmy for Best Show, and the Friends producers wrote to Phil and said, you guys should have won, and sent a basket of food. Now, I think Phil would have rather had the Emmy, but it was a nice gesture.
But a basket of food doesn't hurt.
Yes. From Windlepoons in London, in the UK. Kelsey was apparently very good at ad-libbing. He knew Frasier so well. Did you get a chance to witness that in person?
I don't know if he ad-libbed as much as he would memorize his lines at the last minute. So it always came across like he was sort of ad-libbing and thinking in real time, which was great, because it showed that he was thinking up these words. But usually I feel that it was he was doing what was written. But
Yeah.
there, we would do alternate takes with alternate lines, and I'm sure that he came up with some of those. It was amazing to watch him work, especially there were episodes where he was also directing, and you could see him cutting in his head. It was kind of amazing. Someone say, "Oh, that didn't work," and he'd look up at his head, and you could see him looking at all four cameras. So, okay, I'll take care of it in editing. And I was like, "Aren't you a little busy right now, being the star of a show?" Yeah, that again, like I said, those two shows and those two groups of people, and how kind they all were to me, and every guest star, it makes a huge difference. Huge difference.
Well, I think what also we're referring to before is if you're doing this creative environment and you feel like you're walking on eggshells, nothing good can come from that.
Yeah.
It's a very terrible way to do a creative process. And I think for Phil, he was always like, be nice. That's all I ask. Be nice. And I don't know about the Frasier set, but they were locked in. Kelsey did that character and knew that character so well, right? And the showrunners, it was a well-oiled machine over there. And when I find that it's really people that are, there are some geniuses that, let's say, are the exception. But if you're insecure, like Phil wasn't insecure, Phil knew funny, so he wasn't threatened if a staff writer came up with a really funny idea. He didn't go, boy, that's just a staff writer. He should, he would be like, great, put it in, and so.
Because he didn't forget he was a staff writer.
Maybe.
You know what I mean?
I think he forgot
that's
now.
Part of it. There's part of that.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm kidding. Yes. No, I'm kidding completely.
He did forget.
Yeah.
He stepped on people on his way up.
No, but yes, he knows what it's like not to be listened to. And if we go back to that Beatles documentary, you're watching George Harrison just going, Paul, I'm trying to help. Like, please listen to me. I have some ideas. And you want to reach back in and go, Paul, just give him an acknowledgement, a little more acknowledgement here, And so I think that what you're talking about, when people are encouraged to put forth their best, they accelerate. I mean, you have this unified team. And if you're constantly walking on eggshells and feel like, oh, I said the wrong thing, I better not do, it just dries up the creative process.
Comedy. It really can kill comedy. Not being confident, and being afraid to speak up, being afraid to try something. It's just the death of comedy.
Yeah. Sorry, Karen, Tom, I see you were in the Birdcage, As Good as It Gets, great movies.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
So now, Tom, let me ask you something. And this I would ask, when you're doing a play on Broadway and you're doing the 294th performance, and it's a common question, I know, but the keeping it fresh, because on a movie, you're not like, oh, I've been here for 9 months doing this line, and on a TV show as well. So how did you find that experience?
It is a real challenge. You really have to just listen. What I usually would do, it's funny, I talk to my students about this a lot. I make sure that I remember that I'm on stage with other people. So they're counting on me. And I always try to remember that the audience has never seen this play before. But it can be, by the end of my 2,200 performances of Wicked, your brain is checked out. My brain is like, I know how to do this. I'm going to think about the grocery list. And you have to keep forcing yourself to be like, you're standing in front of 1,500 people. You might want to pay attention. So it can become a challenge. But when you said before about people quoting lines, the moment a play is over, it's sort of out of my mind. I sort of free up that disk space. And I've had people do the same thing. And I'm like, what was that line? What is that from? They're like, the play you closed last week. Do you remember that play you closed last week? I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that line. But it's just there are different skills needed for film and television and theater. And one of them is this repetition thing that just, part of it is fun because you do get to try things different ways, especially in comedies, because it's never always great. So there's always like a couple laughs. You're going to try to figure out why they didn't work last night. And then a couple laughs that went great that you're like, not exactly sure why. So doing a comedy again and again is really fun. Really fun because of that.
And then let me ask you this, Tom, because you're one of the few people that I've spoken with here who've done such a diverse amount of acting. When you're sitting there making the decision, and economics go into it, but you go, okay, I'm going to go into this play. It's steady work. But if I do this movie, this will be forever, for lack of a better thing. A play is ephemeral, and those 1,500 people love it. But in when you're in whatever, when you're in Raymond, it's 100 years from now, people are going to be like, oh yeah, that's Tom McGowan who was in, also. Does that ever weigh into your thought process when you're about to take a job in a play versus, and you talked about it last time, had that play that got pulled quickly, even though it got better reviews than Madame Butterfly, right?
Yeah.
You would not have been on Everest Raymond if that play was a success.
I'm pretty sure that that's true. That I I mean, maybe some other break would have come along, but that was the break that sort of launched me at a time when Phil was out there and all that. The ephemeral thing that you talk about, it's one of the reasons I actually like theater. I do love the fact that it's going to go away and you have to show up. You have to be there. The television and film, like being, there forever, was not something I really thought about until things went into syndication, like Frasier and Raymond, and things were being repeated. And my wife's a big fan of Turner Classic Movies, and we'll watch a lot, and you'll see the character actor that you're like, oh my God, that's the guy from this and that. And you have to look him up. I'm like, there's someday I might be that guy where someone's like, oh, that guy was just in the Birdcage last night, and here he is in As Good as It Gets. And someone's gonna like Wikipedia me and see, oh yeah, he did a lot of stuff. Just one of those, just a working guy, just trying to piece together enough credits to make it to the end.
Yeah. And we should add, for economics, when a show goes into syndication, there's a check that occasionally comes to your mailbox that you don't get when you're on Broadway.
That's exactly right. I never got an extra penny from anything I ever did on Broadway. Once it closed, they actually take you off the payroll. But you do, if you're on a hit show or movies, you will get some residuals along the way. The year Frasier ended, it sort of saved me. I mean, it was because I had done 40-something episodes, and it was enough to sort of survive the year of not working after Frasier.
Right, which is one of the things that we were talking about way back when in the beginning. When you're an actor, your life is constant rejection and uncertainty. Period. Always, for anybody's level.
Yeah.
You look at Marlon Brando's career and some of the movies he did. You're going, what happened to him? What was he doing? Before his career, and it's like that never changes. That being close friends with Ray. You see it where you go, okay, I'm in this now, and now he's doing a show called Made for Love on HBO, which is a good show. I don't know that anybody's seen it.
I haven't. I didn't even know it was on.
So, Tom, I will say this. Now, you said at the beginning how we're at such a high point for television. The amount of people that go, are you watching X? And I go, I've never even heard of X. Oh, it's in season 3, and it's the best show I've ever seen. So, in 1975, that didn't happen.
No, there was only 3 channels, and then reruns of I Love Lucy, and that was it. Yeah. I know. It really is. The streaming stuff is amazing. I'm amazed that I'm not on 5 shows right now. But yeah, it is amazing. And I love it when someone tells me about some show that I never heard of, and you turn it on, you're like, oh my goodness, and you just gobble it up. It's great.
So Tom, I'm scrolling through. We're out of time again.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I'm sorry to the people who the comments go by so fast, but it's so kind of you all to. How was it work with Jack Nicholson? I have also a great story about that. Maybe next time. Terrific. He was terrific to me.
Yeah, and we did. If you watch Tom's previous one, he mentions Jack Nicholson.
Oh, I tell that story.
ELR Christmas mini marathon starting on TV Land now. Tom, were you in any Christmas episodes? I don't remember.
I don't remember.
Someone watching will remember.
Probably. I also did love working with Maggie Wheeler, which people are mentioning. I thought we were a great team. I think we were a great foursome. The dynamics between the 4 of us was really fun.
And Maggie Wheeler was up for the Deborah part, and Ray and Phil both loved her. And so that he at least was able to get her as Tom's wife.
A bit of a downgrade for her, but you got to take what you can get.
Well, it was you and Matthew Perry.
That's right.
How was it to do a Hallmark movie, Teresa from Chicago?
Also fun, but they're all filmed in the summer when it's 90 degrees in winter coats. But it was really fun. That was a real fun one to do. A bunch of Broadway people on that, as you probably know.
Yeah. Will Kenny be a part of the reboot of Frasier? Tom asked.
No
has
idea.
He has not heard that. Now, when
I might just show up and see if they'll put me to work.
Well,
but yeah.
I talked to Maggie before the Friends thing, and she goes, "I haven't heard from him. I don't know if it's coming." And you never know.
Yeah.
All right. So, Tom, the next time you visit, let's say, are you going to Oklahoma again?
Yes, next semester at some point I'll be going. Yeah.
Okay, maybe after your next visit, and maybe if there's a couple of questions from there as well. But we have to get into individual episodes next time. Right. And this has been phenomenal, Tom. I really appreciate it. I hope I see you at Phil's house one of these days again.
I'm sure I will. It's actually great talking to you, Tom. It really is. It's good talking to you without all those other people to bother us.
Without Phil bothering
yeah, exactly.
you. Yes. Yeah. Now, the only confusing part is there's I Love Tom with a bunch of hearts, and these are
all for me. That's
all meant for you. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Tom. Come back soon. All right. So this is Tom Caldabiano talking to Tom McGowan, and we will see you, Tom, after the new year. Thank you so much. Awesome as always.
Great. Have great holidays, everybody, and thank you all listening.
Around the world.
Really fun.
Yes. Bye, everybody.